It started as a small act of kindness, a simple wooden sign that read, "Welcome, friends." The homeowner, Mark, had placed it at the edge of his front garden. A cheerful little decoration beside blooming daisies and a freshly painted mailbox. It wasn't large, flashy, or offensive. It was just warm, the kind of thing that made neighbors smile as they walked by on their morning jogs. But in communities governed by HOAs, warmth wasn't always welcomed. The letter arrived on a windy Tuesday afternoon, folded neatly into an envelope that looked far too official for something so trivial. The HOA seal was stamped at the top, followed by a notice number and a bold red header. Violation notice, non-compliant decorative signage. Below it, the word seemed almost comically bureaucratic, describing how the unauthorized display of signage disrupted the community's visual harmony and violated Section 8B of the Design Compliance Code. The fine was set at $200, payable within 10 business days. At first, Mark laughed. It had to be a mistake. Surely, the board wouldn't waste time fining someone for a friendly garden sign. But a second letter arrived the following week, this time stamped "Final Warning," and the laughter faded. Mark's HOA was notorious for micromanagement. Over the years, stories had circulated about residents fined for leaving trash cans out a few minutes late or using non-approved mailbox colors. Still, this felt personal. The signature at the bottom of both letters belonged to the same person. Karen Dwyer, HOA board member and community compliance officer. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Karen. She was the kind of woman who measured her neighbor's grass height with a ruler and reported unapproved shades of paint to the board. She walked the neighborhood every morning with a clipboard and an expression that could curdle milk. As Mark stood in his front yard that evening, looking at the little wooden sign half hidden behind marigolds, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't about the sign at all. Karen had found her next target, and unfortunately, it was him. He tried to reason with the HOA through emails and forms, attaching photos of the sign and referencing the community guidelines, which, oddly enough, didn't actually mention decorative welcome signs. Each response came back in cold, copy-pasted legalese, reaffirming that he was non-compliant and must correct the violation immediately. The sign stayed. That's when the letters turned into threats of legal action. The HOA demanded removal and payment within 48 hours, citing continued disregard for community standards. Mark's mailbox became a source of dread. Still, he refused to cave. It wasn't about the $200 anymore. It was about principle. Why should one woman's personal vendetta dictate how everyone lived? Over the next few days, he began to observe. Every morning, Karen's white SUV rolled slowly past his house, her window lowered just enough for her to take photos. He watched as she paused longer each time, documenting evidence. But Mark wasn't just angry, he was curious. He started researching Karen Dwyer online. A few search results revealed her name tied to various property listings and management forums. It seemed she wasn't just an HOA board member. She was also a local real estate agent who owned a couple of rental properties. That in itself wasn't surprising. Many board members had side hustles, but something about one particular listing caught his eye. The photos looked familiar. The trim, the windows, the layout, it was unmistakably one of the houses in their own HOA community. According to the bylaws, short-term rentals were strictly forbidden within the neighborhood. Yet here was Karen's name, attached to a property that appeared on multiple rental platforms, advertised as a peaceful suburban getaway. Mark felt his irritation turn into intrigue. The listing had dozens of reviews spanning months, meaning this wasn't a one-time slip-up. It was an ongoing operation. She'd been breaking the very rules she enforced on everyone else. As he scrolled through the rental photos, an idea began to form, half petty, half brilliant. If Karen wanted to fine him for a sign, maybe it was time he made that sign work for him. The next day, Mark began making a few calls. He found a local sign printing company willing to create a large custom display board. He spent hours designing it. Bold letters, crisp layout, and a simple but powerful message. It wouldn't just sit quietly in his flower bed anymore. It would stand tall on his lawn for everyone to see. While waiting for it to be printed, he dug deeper into Karen's online footprint. Screenshots, reviews, and archived pages, all evidence that her peaceful suburban getaway was, in fact, an illegal rental operating under the radar of the HOA she helped run. The hypocrisy was staggering. By the time the new sign arrived, Mark's anger had turned into something sharper. This wasn't revenge for the sake of revenge, it was exposure. If Karen wanted to play by the rulebook, he'd make sure everyone saw exactly how she'd been breaking it. On a bright Saturday morning, while most of the neighborhood was still asleep, Mark installed the new sign in the exact spot where the old one had stood. The letters gleamed under the sun, bold and undeniable. Within an hour, cars slowed as they passed by. Joggers stopped mid-route. Phones came out for photos. By noon, the image had already made its way into the neighborhood Facebook group. The sign read, "Welcome to our HOA, where rules matter, unless you're on the board. Check out 112 Maple Court on orientalfndr.com for our board members' illegal listing." It was petty, it was public, and it was completely factual. Mark didn't know it yet, but that sign would set off a chain reaction that would turn the entire community upside down. Because within 24 hours, not only had the HOA board called an emergency meeting, but Karen Dwyer's name was spreading far beyond their neighborhood, into forums, news posts, and even local housing groups. And that was only the beginning. By sunrise the next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. The once quiet suburban streets of Maplewood Estates had turned into a live drama, and everyone wanted a front row seat. Cars slowed as they passed by Mark's house. Some people smiled, others shook their heads in disbelief, but almost everyone snapped a photo. The HOA's golden reputation was unraveling before breakfast. Within hours, the community Facebook group was on fire. The post featuring Mark's new billboard had exploded with hundreds of comments. Some residents applauded him for standing up to the board's hypocrisy, calling it the best thing to happen to this neighborhood in years. Others worried about the fallout, wondering how the board would retaliate. A few brave souls even began sharing their own stories of questionable fines, biased enforcement, and unexplained fees issued by the same HOA leadership. For the first time, people were talking openly and without fear. Meanwhile, Karen Dwyer was nowhere to be seen that morning. Her white SUV, normally a fixture on the streets during her daily compliance patrols, was conspicuously absent. But her silence didn't last long. Around noon, a new email hit the inboxes of all residents: urgent community notice, misinformation, and defamation. The message, sent from the official HOA account but clearly authored by Karen, accused certain individuals of spreading false information about board members and engaging in public defamation. It described Mark's sign as a gross misrepresentation and warned of serious legal consequences for those who continue to circulate unverified claims. But what Karen didn't anticipate was that Mark had receipts. Plenty of them. The screenshots of her rental listing were now circulating publicly, complete with timestamps, reviews, and archived pages proving the property had been active for months. Several residents recognized the address listed, 112 Maple Court, one of the homes within their own community. The HOA's own bylaws, Section 4C, specifically prohibited short-term or transient rentals. The hypocrisy was undeniable. By mid-afternoon, a few brave homeowners began to organize. A handful of them gathered at Mark's driveway, not to gossip but to discuss action. Some had quietly been saving their own correspondence with Karen and other board members, letters that showed inconsistencies, selective enforcement, and fines issued without evidence. For years, they had tolerated the overreach, believing resistance was pointless. But now they had proof. And a leader. Mark wasn't looking to become one. He hadn't planned a rebellion. Yet somehow, his quiet defiance had evolved into a movement. That evening, an anonymous resident leaked the rental listing to a local housing watchdog page on social media. The post gained traction fast. Within hours, dozens of comments appeared, some from people who had actually stayed at the rental, confirming it was advertised as a short-term suburban retreat, complete with quiet community charm. By the next morning, screenshots from the post had reached the desk of the HOA's vice president, who, unlike Karen, had a vested interest in damage control. An emergency board meeting was scheduled immediately. It was held at the community clubhouse, a sterile, beige room that usually smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. But today it buzzed with tension. Nearly half the neighborhood showed up, something that hadn't happened in years. Residents filled the seats, lined the walls, and stood outside the door. The board members sat at their long folding table, papers stacked, microphones crackling, faces grim. Karen was there too, sunglasses perched on her head and a forced smile on her lips. The HOA president began with a vague statement about maintaining decorum and respecting privacy. But the crowd wasn't interested in pleasantries. They wanted answers. Mark watched from the back, arms crossed, saying nothing. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than any words could. One by one, residents began to ask questions. Was it true about the illegal rental? How long had it been operating? How could the person responsible for enforcing the rules be the same one breaking them? Karen tried to deflect, insisting the property wasn't technically hers, it was in a family trust. But someone from the back of the room called out that the rental listing literally had her name and contact number attached. The murmurs turned into murmurs of disbelief. Then, someone pulled up the website on their phone. They held it high for everyone to see. The name Karen Dwyer glowed on the screen, right beneath the property's description. The room erupted. The HOA president tried to regain control, banging a small gavel against the table, but the damage was done. The illusion of authority had shattered. The crowd had seen enough. Over the next few days, the story spread beyond Maplewood Estates. The local community forum picked it up, then a regional real estate blog. Soon, even a local news outlet ran a small feature, HOA board member under fire for violating own rules. The headline alone was enough to send shockwaves through the neighborhood. Karen's real estate agency began receiving bad reviews. Her listings were flooded with sarcastic comments about strictly enforced community standards.
Client cancelled showing.
And as the pressure mounted, she did what many in her position would do. She lashed out. A new letter appeared in Mark's mailbox. This one was more aggressive than ever, accusing him of harassment, slander, and intentional infliction of reputational harm. It demanded immediate removal of his sign and threatened legal action. But Mark wasn't intimidated anymore. He knew the truth was on his side. And now, the entire neighborhood knew it too. What Karen didn't realize was that while she was drafting angry letters, Mark and a few residents had already contacted the county zoning department. They had provided evidence of her illegal rental operation, complete with guest reviews, transaction histories, and dates. An investigation was quietly underway as the week went on. Small cracks began appearing in Karen's perfect facade. Her morning patrols stopped. Her car remained parked for days. Some said she'd been suspended by her real estate firm pending internal review. Others whispered that she'd been asked to temporarily step down from the HOA board until things blew over. But nothing was blowing over. Because while Karen tried to silence the truth, Mark was preparing his next move. The fine still hadn't been revoked, and the HOA hadn't issued an apology. He wasn't going to settle for exposure. He wanted accountability, so he began drafting a formal petition to remove Karen from the board entirely. He didn't know it yet, but his quiet rebellion was about to become a full-blown neighborhood revolution, one that would permanently change the balance of power in Maplewood Estates. 2 weeks had passed since the now infamous sign appeared in Mark's garden, and Maplewood Estates had transformed from a quiet, rule-bound neighborhood into something almost unrecognizable. Gone were the hushed whispers and fearful compliance that had once defined its residents. In their place was energy, defiance, unity, and a sense that maybe, just maybe, people could stand up to the system that had bullied them for so long. The HOA board was unraveling. After the public exposure of Karen Dwyer's illegal rental, the association's reputation had taken a brutal hit. The county zoning department had confirmed an investigation into multiple short-term rental violations. And while Karen insisted she had done nothing wrong, the evidence told a different story. The rental listing had vanished from the internet overnight, but screenshots, reviews, and archived pages ensured that her secret could never be scrubbed clean. The board had hoped the scandal would fade. It didn't. In fact, it ignited something much larger. A community reckoning. Mark's petition to remove Karen from the board spread like wildfire. Within days, signatures poured in, far surpassing the number required for a special vote. Even homeowners who had never attended a meeting in years were suddenly engaged, showing up with documents, old letters, and stories about their own experiences with the HOA's heavy-handedness. As the pressure mounted, the board tried to buy time. They issued vague statements about reevaluating leadership structures and ensuring fair and transparent governance. But no one was buying it. The residents wanted action. They wanted Karen gone. The final vote was scheduled for the end of the month. In the days leading up to it, tension hung heavy in the air. Karen's house, once the pristine, polished model home of the neighborhood, now stood strangely quiet. The clipboard she used to carry during her morning walks was nowhere to be seen. The blinds were always drawn. Some said she was waiting for legal advice. Others claimed she was preparing to sue. Mark, meanwhile, kept his sign up. The grass around it grew neatly trimmed, the flowers still bright, as if mocking the chaos it had unleashed. Neighbors stopped by to thank him, some leaving small notes, others offering cookies. A few even admitting they had always wanted to stand up but hadn't known how. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about fairness. The night of the special vote arrived. The community clubhouse was packed once again, filled to the walls with anxious residents. Even those who rarely spoke in public had come, their eyes sharp with determination. The air buzzed with low conversation until the president called the meeting to order. Karen sat at the far end of the table, composed but pale. Gone was her usual smugness. In its place was a brittle calm. She still wore her trademark blazer, but her eyes darted nervously as ballots were distributed. The process was simple: a yes or no vote for her removal from the board, pending a formal ethics review. Mark didn't speak during the meeting. He didn't need to. His presence alone carried weight. Everyone knew what had happened, and the evidence was already public record. The residents had seen the hypocrisy with their own eyes. When the votes were finally collected, the room fell into silence. The president took a deep breath, unfolded the paper slips one by one, and began counting. It didn't take long to see where the numbers were heading. 73 in favor of removal. 9 against. Karen Dwyer was officially dismissed from the board. The announcement triggered a ripple through the room, part applause, part disbelief, part long-suppressed relief. For many, it felt like the end of an era, the breaking of a long and frustrating cycle. For Karen, it was humiliation beyond measure. Without a word, she stood, gathered her papers, and left through the back door without looking at anyone. The sound of the door closing behind her was quieter than anyone expected, but its echo lingered. In the weeks that followed, things began to change around Maplewood Estates. The board, now under new leadership, began revising its rules. Excessive fines were reduced, petty restrictions lifted, and communication between homeowners and the board became more transparent. People who had once avoided involvement started volunteering for committees. For the first time in years, it felt like a real community. The county's investigation into Karen's illegal rental concluded with fines totaling thousands of dollars. The rental license was revoked permanently, and her real estate firm quietly dropped her from their listings. Eventually, her house went up for sale, a newly renovated property with strong community charm. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. As for Mark, he finally removed the sign, not because he was told to, but because it had done its job. The message had been delivered, and the change was already in motion. He replaced it with a smaller one, the same wooden board that had started everything, once again reading simply, "Welcome, friends." Now, though, the words meant something deeper. Where there had once been fear and silent resentment, there was now laughter, shared lawn tools, and weekend cookouts. The neighbors who had once avoided each other's eyes on trash day were now planning block parties together. It wasn't perfect, no community ever was, but it was real. Sometimes, people asked Mark if he regretted what happened, if he wished he'd just taken the sign down and paid the fine to avoid the drama. He never answered directly, only smiled and looked out across the neighborhood. The same streets where a petty power play had ignited something bigger than anyone expected. Because, in the end, it wasn't about the sign. It was about standing up to unfairness, about exposing hypocrisy, and about reminding everyone that authority only works when it's built on integrity. And while Karen Dwyer's name had become something of a cautionary tale around Maplewood Estates, her downfall left behind something unexpected. A sense of unity, pride, and freedom that no HOA regulation could ever enforce. The garden sign that started it all had become a quiet legend, a story neighbors would tell newcomers for years. They'd point at Mark's yard and say, "That's where everything changed." And, in a way, they'd be right. Because in a community once ruled by fear, it took one small sign to remind everyone what it truly meant to call a place home.